Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. We've been exploring the idea of breaking out of neurological trauma loops. And when we go through and we do our practices, that's part of what we're doing, but to kind of go through and have a deeper understanding of the practice, I think also helps us to work the things that we do normally every week, to work it a little bit deeper, a little bit harder, with a little bit more intention. And, we think of trauma as the thing that our mind recalls, our memory, the past event, or our emotions that get stirred up. But a lot of times, the trauma that we feel is actually a neurological loop that's in the body. That's why the idea of being triggered is an issue, we engage this trauma loop, with whatever stimuli, got us to that place. And all of a sudden, we just go through this loop without really thinking about it, without choosing it. We just go into this repetitive thing that happens, that arises, and we get anxious, we be afraid, we get upset, we relive some of that situation a little bit. And for the body doesn't see the story. The body doesn't see the person, doesn't see the event, doesn't see all the nuances. The body just sees what it had to do to get through whatever that event was, right? So it makes some sort of shift, it makes some sort of adaptation to handle this loop. And it's tied to the intellectual mind. In the body it's the mind, and in the body it's a thing called homeostasis. But we also have it in the environment, where we have these loops where we get into a social situation, everybody's behaving a particular way, and boom, we're in that loop when we get around those kinds of people. I used to have a friend that was from the Northeast, and he didn't have his accent, but when he would get around people from, where he grew up, all of a sudden he'd start talking with that accent again. That's not necessarily trauma, but it just shows how he wasn't really aware that he was doing it, but he would get around those people, he would have some of that stimuli, and pretty soon he was talking like he did when he was younger. And so um, when we go through and we do the practice like with Lama Yoga, and we do that practice where we meditate on the rows and breathe in the rows, or we do the back, heart, navel, crown, any version of this, we're breaking out of these loops because we're starting to do observation, right? With intellect is repetitive in nature, and it maintains itself, right? It's always about just maintaining and trying to predict the future and trying to be comfortable, right? So we start to become very hypothetical. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this goes on? What if that goes on? What if I don't know what to say? What if I don't know what to do? You know, where intuition is how we break out of these loops. And that's why we talk about intuition, why we talk about clairvoyance, why we talk about the three brain practice. It's why we do Lama Yoga, things like this, because in the observation, right, in the observation, you start to break out of the loop. You start to re educate that loop, because we're always going to make these loops, right? But if we do it with intention, we start creating loops that has to do with accessing our true nature, with accessing our higher self, with morals, with the virtues that we'd like to bring in. Even if it's inner peace, you start to create these loops that are about having inner peace. And so we are going to do a practice tonight, but I thought I'd open it up to questions. And as much as I try to explain things and we do a practice, we don't always have the time for you guys to ask your questions and get like your deeper understanding. So we're going to unmute or let you type in and either share an experience or ask a question, and we'll do some of that and then we'll get into the practice. So go ahead and fire away. No, I think I catch you guys off guard when I say, hey, you can answer a question. So take a moment and think about it. And then it can be personal or about the technique. It doesn't matter. Go ahead and
Yeah, go ahead, Linda. Start us out, and then
hey,
Dan.
hey, Linda.
Hi, I'm so glad you gave us this opportunity because I do have a question.
Oh,
Um,
good.
the last week we did this, and I know it's showing up in some of the other things you're doing too. We're
Mhm.
paying more attention these days, it seems to me, to that point that is about 12 inches above the top of our crown, about
Right,
the top of our head.
right.
And I was wondering if you could talk and just explain that point to us, what it's about, what it's, just it's been a while since I've heard any teacher discuss,
Sure. Oh, yeah, I
what
would love
I
to.
what I think is it the 12th chakra or
Yeah. So, like, if we go like way above our head, there's the higher soul, right? And then the higher soul invests a piece of itself and it comes down as the incarnated soul. And that incarnated soul is anchors on the energy body 12 inches above the head. So it's tied to our overall experiences. It's still a piece of the higher soul, but um, it's kind of like what is gathering up the light to eventually take it back to the higher soul. Because the higher soul doesn't look at our experiences as like, did you get to go to the Grand Canyon? Did you get to, do this? Did you pray with your hands in the right way? The higher soul just goes, how much light did you bring me? So like when we pass and leave the body and we go back up, the incarnated soul goes, I have this much light, right? And so it is the incarnated soul. It is a point of light. And when we begin to develop and grow, it starts to get to be like a little ball. And then eventually it turns into a bud. And then eventually it will turn into like a little, like small chakra. And then eventually it will even become a big chakra.
Mm.
And you could say it's like a spiritual water faucet. You know how like sometimes in some spiritual traditions they'll talk about the living water. It's tied to how much that point of light gets stimulated and has accumulated enough light to where it starts getting bigger. Because you could say for the average person, it's a very like almost like a on the head of a pen or something, like a straight pen, like it's real tiny, but it's bright. But then eventually it starts to get bigger and bigger. And as it gets bigger, it allows for more spiritual energy to come down into the mental body, the emotional body, and the physical body. And so it's not really a chakra except for like maybe great spiritual teachers.
Okay.
You'll see it as uh, like Lord Rama in the Hindu tradition, you see a lotus above Brahma's head. And then in the Buddhist tradition, Padmasambhava, which also is Mealing, Buddha Mealing, there's a lotus above the head. And then in the Egyptian tradition, Nefertum, they'll say born of the flowering or blossoming lotus, where there's a lotus above the head. And so, I mean, that's a great, great teacher, great, great being coming into the body. It's already activated. It's already a chakra. So
Mhm.
for us, for our development, as we go through and we live a good life and we spiritually connect, that starts to turn into a ball and then eventually a bud. And at some point, when we really step onto an accelerated spiritual path, eventually it will start to bud a little bit. And so the reason that I keep kind of driving our awareness there is for one, like when we make a connection between the heart and the brain, that's a very strong connection, because a lot of what you're doing is you're shifting your brain from being driven by your lower nature and you're allowing your brain to be driven by the heart, right?
Mm.
And so that is an important step, and that is one of the connections between the incarnated soul and the higher soul. But we also have things that happen to us, or we have, karmas, or things that are like patterns that we're working through. And a lot of times people will think of karma as like a kind of punishment, but really a lot of times it's just like a learning curve. Like you're just trying to, as a soul, learn something, develop an ability, or work your way out of a certain tendency that maybe you have done for, lifetimes. Be it that it's a result of somebody, doing something, or difficult times, or whatever it might be. And so part of what happens when we make that connection between the heart and the brain, and then we start raising our awareness up above the head, part of what's happening is we are transmuting things that have happened both in the nervous system and in the body, and from our past, and from the emotions, and from our thought processes. And as we are able to move energy up from the top of our head up to 12 inches above our head, one of the things that happens is it registers as lesson learned, right? And one of the ways that we can quickly break out of some sort of pattern in our life is especially when the soul is, you know, trying to learn a lesson, or pushing us to like work through a particular issue, whatever it might be. Because a lot of times it's the soul guiding us to do that. It's not some big being going, go stand in the corner. It's usually the soul pushing you to like, your body, emotions, or mind, like go have these experiences because you need to learn something, or you need to work through something, or evolve out of something. And when you raise your awareness up to that level, it registers as lesson learned. And then, like you could say, there's a kind of grace or mercy that comes with that. And so, who couldn't use a little grace and mercy in life? And so, that idea of raising your awareness up like that, it's a way to like have your prayers heard and answered to a certain extent, because you're expanding out of your mind and your intellect and your emotions and things. But it's also a way to say, like, I learned my lesson. It's not that you're asking for mercy, but mercy happens when you do that. In the Native American tradition, they would do this practice where they would try to achieve a connection there, and uh, they would do it through like vision quest, or like they would call it like crying for a vision, like, I'm suffering through this, please grant me mercy, or please guide me in the lesson or the medicine that I need in this time in my life. And so you could say it's like, a kind of medicine that you access there, and you're just saying like, I've learned my lesson, I've worked through this, I'm moving past this, I'm refining myself. you know you don't have to hit me over the head with a 2x4. You can just have a gentle whisper in the ear, rather than, you know because if you notice, like when you have some patterns, like you go, oh yeah, yeah, that's there, and then it keeps like uh condensing on you. Like it's just like you keep like not being able to get away from it as much as you try. You change jobs, you break up with people, you move to a new state, you keep doing all these different things, and it keeps, you might get away from it for a little bit, but it keeps coming. And at some point, it's like being hit over the head with a 2x4. It's like you are going to address this. And so at some point, you just go, okay, I've got the lesson. Stop hitting me over the head. You know, stop chasing me around with wherever I go, whatever I do. And yeah,
Yeah, great. Thank you very
you're
much.
so welcome.
And then go ahead, Dan, then Lavanya.
Hey, Dan. How are you?
Let's get you unmuted.
Hey, there we go. We're there. We're almost there. Okay. Um, yeah, a couple of things. Maybe even kind of polar, if you will. Um, is it, I mean, just with what you guys were talking about before,
Mhm.
is it okay to keep your awareness kind of there? Because sometimes I find myself like, where should I keep my awareness, right? Is it okay
You
to keep
can, yeah.
your awareness like up there kind of thing?
You
Or
can like it might not be the most efficient, like say at work or something, but
yeah, I've noticed that too. It's not
yeah,
like when you're
yeah, yeah.
trying to do the logical thing, right? That's doesn't
But
really,
like when you're doing your meditation or when you're just home relaxing or the more that you kind of spend time up there, it's almost like being able to access guidance from the higher soul. At first we kind of do it in the center of the head, in the middle of the pineal gland. But I would say a deeper form of accessing guidance and information or some sort of transmission from the soul is that area up 12 inches above the head. And so, yeah, you can keep your attention there. Keeping your attention there, it's gently kind of stimulating that center. There's processes where you can like stimulate it really hard, but the downside of that is sometimes the amount of energy that comes in is so much that it can be a little overwhelming to the body, or uh, like karmas will accelerate for a little bit. And it doesn't always mean bad, bad karmas. It could be good karmas too. But with the practices that we do, it's like a gentle like approach to doing that. And so keeping your awareness up there, it's very much a thing that you can do. Um, and the more that you can refine it, it's very similar. There's this center down on the backside of your navel called the Ming Men, which I know you're aware of, but
yeah,
and so the Ming Men shoots energy up, and it's part of how we experience, for one, the activation of our upper centers, because it's shooting energy up from the lower centers up high, but it's also how we um, move energy up even to this point of light 12 inches above our head. But the Ming Men also can take energy and move it down. Like when we do something where we're bringing something into form, or we're materializing a thought form, or anchoring an emotion, like you're trying to, improve something, or you're doing a materialization process of some sort. Part of what happens is the Ming Men also takes the energy down into the sex chakra and then eventually to the basic to bring things into form. So the Ming Men will elevate things, but also lower the vibration so that it comes into form. And you could say that that point of light above your head has a similar property, and even the higher soul also has a similar property. Like it raises things up, but it also brings things down. Like so, we're having expansion, your awareness is
right.
up there. It's like, oh, you're getting to experience the higher realm or the inner worlds or whatever it might be. But also putting your awareness there helps you to have like guidance from the soul, or even a kind of protection from the soul, and kind of healing, even because even when we look at like things that are health issues, is in some way there's some sort of life force in those areas that are have reduced, and we're having problems with the body, or whatever it is, because there's a lack of life force. So again, going back to that area, it's like they call that the living water sometimes in different traditions, but it's just
Yeah,
like the pure light that comes in. They'll call it different things, but it can kind of wash over you and you could say it's some of the mechanisms associated of like how miraculous healing can happen is like that opens up or is big enough for like energy to come down from higher above. And
Okay.
so keeping your awareness on that, like especially in meditation practice or healing practices or something like that, even getting transmissions, from the soul or from a inner teacher of some sort is tied to having your awareness on that area. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So when for like MCKS, when he does his living water
Hmm.
meditation, is that
Hmm.
the same living
Yeah.
water kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's a super old meditation. Yeah.
yeah, that's yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so kind of on the polar side of that, when I find myself like I get nudged, right? Where you just, where we had that neurological loop, right? Where you just
Yeah.
kind of feel like you're, "Ugh," and you start, your mind start going down that path, and you just find your,
Right.
how, is there a good way to catch yourself? What I did today was just put a
Yeah.
pause in there and not say anything, right? I just kind of,
Observation is always like the first step. Like
yeah,
if you can go, like, it's hard sometimes when you're in the middle of the loop, but if you just go, okay, I'm behaving a particular way, or I'm feeling like I should do, uh,
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
that is. But if you can just go, okay, I'm just gonna observe the situation, or sometimes if the situation is too much, observe your breath, but like the nostrils and the air moving in and out of the nostrils,
right.
because it's the issue is not so much about that you need to observe the situation, but in that situation, you need to observe, right? So that
Oh,
you're still being present with it, but you go, okay, I'm gonna watch my breath. I'm gonna watch my thoughts. I'm gonna, the body is an easy one because it's gross. Like you feel pain, you feel tension, you feel, you know, you feel like when something's not feeling good or achy, and so it's an easy place to go to just like start observing. And so that's why a lot of times I'll go, okay, feel it in the body, where do you feel it? And I don't really make a big deal out of it. Needs to be super specific in a particular area. You really have to evaluate all the different things in your body and go to the one that's the primary. The goal is really just to observe. And as soon as you start observing, you're engaging the intuitive mind, and you're already starting to break out of that loop, because even that loop is like a form of intellect. It's repetition. And so if you think about when you go into more of the intuitive mind, you're not in your intellect anymore. Like if you tried to balance your checkbook when you're being all intuitive, it would be really super hard. But
yeah.
when you're trying to break out of that loop, you're really trying to break out of that repetition. And so you just have to start observing. And so different practices do it different ways. Like when I traveled with the medicine man, he would send me on a task, and then I would come back and he'd go, "What did you observe?" And, at first, like I'm a city boy, and I was like, what do you mean? What did I observe? And then, he'd go, like, what did you notice? And, you know, like, what was the color of the grass? Was the grass long? Was it short? Was there trees? Was there wind? Was there, and the more that I started kind of paying attention to, like, he'd say, hey, go fill this bucket full of water and come back. And, maybe it's a 5 or 10 minute trip. I'd sit down and he goes, what would you observe? I could talk for 20 minutes, after a while,
Mm,
because I was like, I observed this, I observed that. Because if you think about it, how many times do we go through life with tunnel vision? Which
sure,
that tunnel vision
sure.
is you being in your head. Like, if you think about
Mm,
it, you're in your head, you're in a story, you're in some repetitive thought, you're thinking out some hypothetical or something that happened in the past, and you're not really observing your environment. And so, you know the more that you kind of observe your surroundings, the more that you kind of pop out of that story in your head and you're like, okay, now I can process information now. Because when you're in your head, like when you're in the intellect, you're dealing with right now, and you're dealing with, like, say it's stress, you're dealing with all the stress in the past. So you've got this big bucket of stress here, and then the little bit of stress here, but your reaction is this, like both
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah,
And
good
if
analogy.
you,
Yeah.
what's that?
Yeah, good analogy. The way
Yeah,
you
and
brought
so
those,
like if you can
because
go to
yeah,
observation,
Yeah.
then you're just dealing with the stress right now. Like,
Yeah.
and it can be stressful, but you don't have the weight of
yeah,
the past
baggage.
coming forward in
Yeah,
that moment.
sure.
And that's the thing that we have, is we get older, we keep bringing all these things from the past forward because that is the nature of intellect, is repetition and maintenance. And so it doesn't see the difference between the past and right now. It's all one big piece.
Right.
Intuition goes, yeah, that was the past. Like, let it go. Like
Yeah.
that's how we let things go. And not only do we let it go mentally and emotionally, but we also let it go in the body, because the body's a lot like an elephant. The mind and the emotions might have let go of the past, but the body kind of doesn't forget. Like, it was like, nope, one day we had a really bad day. It might happen again. Like, let's not let our guard down. Let's not let it happen again. And so that's where these hypotheticals start coming in, and the repetition and the worry about the different things in the environment. A lot of it is neurological. And, at first you're observing the body, then you're observing like emotions and maybe your thoughts and then your breath. But what you're also doing is you're cultivating the ability to observe things that are even more refined, like higher up. After you observe the mind, then you're starting to observe things outside of yourself and higher experiences. And like you said, that point of light above your head. We have to jump over to the mystic vibration,
Oh,
but let's just drag this conversation over to that and continue if you
okay.
don't mind.
Yeah.
Let's just switch, and then we'll come right back, and we'll still get the questions with you guys, and we'll go from there.
Okay.